And he also, I always refer to it as games because that's how he referred to it, other games that we weren't supposed to tell anybody about. Yeah, I didn't think very highly of myself. A lot of people were pretty quick to reinforce that. And he would punch me and slap me around and throw me across the room, throw things at me. I started going out with husband number two and met husband number three. Got me flowers and we would go dancing and it felt so right. And so I married him. And it was probably a year into the marriage that I realized quite how much he drank.
Have you ever felt insignificant? You know, like what you say really doesn't matter. Have you ever been made fun of or been taken advantage of? Maybe you've just been ignored, like your voice, your opinion has no value. Where might this line of thinking lead a person? Could this low self-esteem lead someone into unhealthy relationships? Could this emotional pattern lead someone into a harmful way of life? Sometimes I can allow my own negative self-talk to guide me down a dark path. Sometimes the enemy capitalizes on this mindset, tempting me to believe that it's okay to be treated poorly. Sometimes the chaos that ensues deceives me into believing that God doesn't have a plan for my life. Does God have a plan for my life? And if so, how do I know? These are the topics that I want to discuss with my guest today as she shares her life change story with us. I'm Eric Hutchinson, and this is the If Nothing Changes podcast. So, hey, new friend, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
My name's Linda, and I'm from a little town about 30 miles out of Springfield, Missouri. Moved here when I was about 4, and we lived in the country, which I loved. I was a barefoot tree climbing tomboy, loved to read, and much of my childhood was spent under a tree somewhere reading a book.
So, Linda, why don't you tell us a little bit about your childhood? What was it like growing up in your home? And let me know if you had any siblings or not.
I had 2 older brothers. The oldest one actually had some mental health issues, but back in the 60s, that wasn't really diagnosed. And so life was just interesting. And it wasn't until he was an adult that we ever knew any kind of a diagnosis. And it was schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, borderline, all of it, all of it.
Was there any faith in your family or religion? Did you guys go to church? I mean, tell me a little bit about that aspect of your family.
Well, my dad was a non-practicing Catholic, and my mom was some sort of Pentecostal, and they compromised on the faith issue by never going to church except for weddings and funerals. So we were not churched unless we happened to spend the night with a friend who went to church some morning. So it was pretty random throughout my childhood.
So do you recognize any dysfunctions now that maybe you didn't recognize then?
I do. I think my mom was possibly clinically depressed because there was a long period after she went back to work, when she would spend literally hours staring out the picture window. And I would come through to get a drink or something. And hours later, I would go back and she'd be in the same spot, still staring out the window. And I would ask her, how can you do that? And she'd say, do what? And I'd say, do nothing for so long. And she just never had an answer. But I do know that she was a city girl that got transplanted into the middle of nowhere. And I think she had some struggles with that. Life wasn't what she thought it was going to be. The other brother, that was my big bubby, and we had a lot of good times together. He taught me how to play touch football and played board games with me. And he also I always refer to it as games because that's how he referred to it, other games that we weren't supposed to tell anybody about. And that went on for about 4 years. And sometimes the games grew pretty serious. And, but that was my big bubby. He protected me on the bus from those bullies, and he protected me from the bully at home. And I loved him then, and I love him now. But I never even thought of it as any kind of abuse until I was 50 years old and went to Celebrate Recovery.
So how would you label that now? Was it a sexual abuse, or was there, I mean, were you
Yes.
guys, okay. So there were some sexual things going on there as a child.
Yes.
Yeah, that's always hard. And it's hard to, a lot of times that impacts us later, and we don't even realize that it was our, things that happened to us when we were children. So,
Yes.
well, what would you say today? Well, if you're looking back at your childhood, say pre-high school, what would you say your most difficult thing that you struggled with? What were the issues, the things that you were dealing with the most when you were a child?
I struggled with schoolwork, and things just didn't seem to click like they did for other people. And I never was sure what to make of that. And so that was a struggle for me. And because I didn't fit in with really anybody. Um, let's see. When I got into junior high, um, that was horrible because I was bullied by a lot of the guys, the popular guys, the guys that are involved in sports. And uh, I played a monkey in the school play. And so forever after that, all those boys would call me monkey. And, you're 12 and 13, that's a hard enough time just living. And, but what would happen is I would walk down the hallway at school, and I won't say all of the boys, but a lot of the boys would line up against the lockers on either side of the hall, and they would make monkey noises and actions. It was like walking a gauntlet, and I didn't know what to do. So I just pretended I didn't see them and went about my way. Yeah, I didn't think very highly of myself. And a lot of people were pretty quick to reinforce that.
Was there anybody that you could, share some of these feelings with? Did either of your parents or your brothers? I mean, or you have a best friend that you were able to share some of these things with, or did you just stuff them down?
Oh, I just stuffed them down for the most part. It seemed like when I said anything, um, the response was something like, "Oh, that's just life. You'll just have to deal with it."
So let's move into high school a little bit. So when people get into high school, and I've talked to a lot of people, and that tends to be where some things start happening to us. We get a little bit of freedom. We're able to go places without our parents. What was your high school like? Did you get into anything that you shouldn't have, or were you pretty much a rule follower?
I wasn't bad enough to be part of the bad crowd, but I was bad enough to not be part of the good crowd. So once again, I just didn't feel like I fit anywhere. I wasn't in the beta club. I didn't make great grades. I wasn't in the clubs. Didn't do a lot of sports. Um, it wasn't a terrible time. It was better than junior high. But yes, I had a small group of friends, and we would drink sometimes and smoke pot sometimes. And
So would you say that it was, I mean, more experimental and not really addiction related whenever you were in
oh,
high school?
absolutely, yes. This is experimental.
Yeah. So how did you do socially? When you got into high school, did you date any? Did you have any boyfriends or anything like that in high school, or did you still stay mostly to yourself?
I dated a little bit in high school. And after graduation, I was dating a fellow, and I thought it was great. And then one day he said, I should have told you a long time ago, but I'm engaged to somebody. Like, yeah, you should have told me a long time ago. But anyway, that was very hurtful to me. And I don't remember how it actually developed. I think I probably saw him at a convenience store, but one of the local policemen, and we started to talk. That developed into a relationship, and we ended up leaving. I left in a manner very hurtful to my parents, and he wanted to go to Las Vegas, and I wanted to go with him, so that's where we went. That was horrible. Um,
You said that you left in not a good manner. Describe that to me. How did you leave? I mean, did you have a blowout with your parents, and what did that look like?
he was convinced that my parents wouldn't willingly let me go. I'm not sure why he thought that actually. And so he thought it would be best if one of his police friends came with me to my house to get my things to leave. And and I did. So that's what happened. And of course, my parents were very shocked when a policeman shows up on the door and I'm there. They thought I was in trouble at first, but then he's like, no, she's just going to get her things. And they were very shocked and they were very hurt. And but I got some things and we left. And I always regretted that. And thankfully, I was able to make an amends to my dad at one point, specifically that they always loved me, but I was able to make an amends for the way I left because I know how hurtful that was to them. But we ended up in Las Vegas, which was terrible. And I started to find out what an emotional bully he was. And he thought I was stupid and never hesitated to tell me so. And would call me any manner of things. And I was pregnant and didn't know for a while that I was pregnant. I just knew that I was sick all the time. And so I couldn't work. And he would go to work and he would leave. We lived in a little studio apartment and he would tell me, don't you talk to anybody. I got people watching you. And I never was sure what he thought I was going to do, but I didn't want him to think I was doing anything. So I didn't talk to anybody. And he would give me $2 every day before he left. And I would walk to the grocery store around the corner and get 2 banquet TV dinners a day. And it's the only time I ever left the apartment because I was afraid. I was just afraid. When we did find out I was pregnant, he wanted me to get an abortion. I just didn't understand it. And I did not get an abortion. And but it was when he found out I wasn't going to get an abortion that he became very physically abusive. And he would punch me and slap me around and throw me across the room, throw things at me. And but we ended up back in Springfield. And the last time I saw him, we were driving down Kansas Expressway. And where we were going, he was so angry that I knew that when we got there, either I was going to die or my baby was going to die, or we were both going to die. I just knew this. And he was punching me in the face while we were driving down the road. And we stopped at a stoplight. And I jumped out of the car and I ran down the sidewalk. And he had traffic behind him and the light changed, so he had to keep going. And I went to about the third house down the street and I banged on the door and these 2 ladies let me in. And I was crying and I was a mess. And I asked if I could use their phone. And this was, 45 years ago. So yeah, they let me use their phone. And I called my parents and told them the gist of what had just happened. And they said, we'll be right there. And they were. And it turns out this is just one way God works, even though I did not know him. Those 2 ladies, that was a women's shelter. It was a women's shelter. And they were able to talk to me. It took my parents probably 40 minutes to get there. And so they talked to me and they told me, the statistics about how often somebody goes back right into that situation. And usually the guy says, I'll never do it again. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But statistics show that it does happen again and it escalates each time. And something to me listened to that. So I did not go back to him, and my parents just allowed me to stay with them. And that's where I had my oldest child.
So let me ask you this. So you mentioned, God protecting you, and you see that now. What did you believe about God then? I mean, you said you weren't really raised in a Christian home, and there, religion and faith really wasn't. I mean, so what did you believe about God? Was he some deity up in the sky, or was he, I mean, what did you think about God during that time in your life?
I believed in God. Um, yeah, a deity up in the sky, though. He wasn't personal to me, but I believe there was a God, a creator. Even at the time, I believed God rescued me from that situation, but it still wasn't personal. And so we stayed there until um, I started going out with husband number two.
So how old was your child at that time, that point?
He was 3 years old.
Okay. So he was 3 when you kind of started dating your second husband to be. How long did you guys date before you got married, or was it pretty quick?
We dated for a year and a half. Meanwhile, I stayed with my parents, and I we did wait because I wanted to be sure. I didn't want to just uh, jump into anything, and so we got married. And he was in the military. He had just joined the military, and he was pretty strict with Michael, but that's what I thought it was. He was just strict. Um, and it wasn't until several years later, we were stationed in Wyoming, and I had twins. God was nowhere in our lives. We were just both living according to the standards of the world, and just just living life. I did things I shouldn't have done. He did things he shouldn't have done. And he was also an alcoholic. So was the first one. I didn't mention that. Um, and it was after that that my second husband made this big distinction between my kid and his kids, which seemed very odd to me because they were all my kids. But he was verbally and emotionally abusive to my oldest child. And then I felt stuck in this situation of do we leave for the sake of the one child, or do we stay for the sake of the other two? And finally, I came to the point where I didn't want my two younger ones thinking it was normal to treat a child the way he treated their older brother. And so we left.
So when you say he was abusive, was he physically abusive, or was it only emotional?
Um, he would do things like when he was 4 years old, like pick him up by the hair of the head. And if he cried, he called him names and things like that.
So you've got 3 kids now. How long were you married to your second husband before you decided that it was just too much?
9 very long years.
So 9 years. So that would mean that Michael would have been, what, 12 years old, something like that, whenever you decided to leave, or not?
Yes, I think he was in middle school.
Okay. So how did that happen? Give me the events of you leaving. Was it a big blow up, or did you sneak out with the kids, or I mean, or did he get custody of the kids? I mean, what happened? Tell me a little bit about that situation.
Things had just gotten to a point where I was clinically depressed and couldn't think. And he went to work one day, and I just found myself. I was doing laundry, and I just found myself putting all of our clothes in the biggest suitcase we had, and we left. And we went to. This was in a different town. This was in Sedalia, and we went to the women's shelter there. So anyway, that was a terrible time, and took 9 months. He sued me for custody of the children, And when we came to the custody trial, he dragged me through the mud.
Did you get custody of all three kids then?
I did get custody of all three kids.
So now you're a single mom. What happened next?
It was a very interesting time. Um, I worked part-time and I got several scholarships, small scholarships. And actually, I had a full ride to Warrensburg. And I was pretty proud of myself because I'd been told my whole life I was stupid. And but finances were a struggle. Finances were a struggle. And we were making it, but we were just making it. And then 1 month of child support didn't come. And the day they turned off my utilities was the day I moved back in with my parents. Um, they were always very good to me.
So you went from having a job, going to school, not being able to pay the bills because your ex-husband wasn't paying his alimony or his child support. And so then you had to move back in with your parents, right?
I had to move back in with my parents, which meant um, uh, I lost my scholarship. I wasn't through with college yet, and I lost my scholarship and moved back and got a job, got a decent job, and met husband number three. It was somebody else I had known from high school. I'd known the second husband from high school also. And this husband, he was a cowboy and he was romantic and got me flowers and we would go dancing and it felt so right. It just felt right. I told everybody I knew, oh, this just feels so right. You don't get the pitter patter thing. And so I married him. And we lived in poverty, and I didn't understand that for a long time because we both worked. And it was probably a year into the marriage that I realized quite how much he drank. He drank a lot. And he was beginning to do uh, scary things. I was afraid to leave my kids home with him. And I was afraid that he'd drive somewhere with them for one thing, but he was also doing stupid things, just stupid, ignorant things. And so I would confront him about his drinking. Say, I don't want to raise my kids like this. And he would say, oh, okay, okay, yes, yes, don't leave, don't leave, don't leave. I'll stop. And he would stop, or at least I would think he had stopped for a while, but that cycle happened 3 or 4 times. And he would say, okay, I won't drink. And then, a week later I would find, a 12 pack of beer in his truck and that kind of thing. So I thought we would leave for safety's sake. And that's why we left. But he never quit drinking. And so we didn't go back. And then 2 years after we had left, I found out that he had been molesting my 10-year-old daughter.
Oh my gosh.
And so we left and went back to my parents. And I told myself I didn't want to get divorced because a few months previously I had gotten saved.
So I'll tell you what, let's back up now because you mentioned God in this thing. And so how did that happen?
My oldest son had gotten saved when he was about 8. We were still living in Sedalia. And other people had always taken him to church. I didn't care if he went to church. I just couldn't be bothered to take him. And it doesn't make me proud to say that, but that is what it was. And so he'd gotten saved, and we're living in Ash Grove, and he started going to this one church, and he would ask me to go to church with him. And I'd be like, no, I don't want to go to church. I don't want to go to church. And then the church van would come get him. And then he got his younger brother and sister to come to church with him. And so all 3 of my kids are riding the church van to this church. And I saw a thing on TV one time during this period of time about snake handling churches. And it clicked with me that, wow, I may be sending my children off to the Full Gospel Church or the rattlesnake handlers. And meanwhile, my son's still asking me to come to church, still asking me to come to church. And to humor him and also to check this place out, I went to church with him one day. And there were no snakes, I'm happy to say. And when the altar call came, I couldn't tell you what the pastor said, but I do know that my heart was hammering in my throat when he gave the altar call, and I was compelled to go forward. And nobody came to pray with me or anything like that. I didn't have any idea what a sinner's prayer was. It was just me and God, and I was just full of repentance for the way I had lived my life because it was obviously a mess, and I couldn't continue that way. I couldn't keep dragging my children through nonsense, and so I basically I was like, I've made a mess of my life, God, and my kids' lives, and I don't know what to do with this mess. So here, and I surrendered. I surrendered it all to God, and I I don't know that I realized that's what I did. I don't know that I realized that I got saved that day, but that's what happened. That is what happened. And because everything was different, everything looked different, everything seemed different. I was different, and now, 29 years later, I look back at that uh, time before, and I literally am a new person. I can't even believe I was that other person blundering through life.
So that's amazing. So God, during your third marriage, God intervened. You went to church, and again, I'm making a little bit of an assumption, trying to put the pieces together that your cowboy alcoholic husband didn't go with you to church during that time, and so you had this decision that you made, and it started changing your life from the inside. Now, fast forward to what you were just telling me earlier. Things were getting bad. You get divorced from your third husband, and are you back with your parents again, or where are you now after your divorce from your third husband?
Yes, I went back to live with my parents, and I stayed there for a couple of years. Um, did I mention how gracious my parents were to me my entire life?
Yes.
Wonderful. And I don't know, I would be probably without my parents, I would be homeless or dead or a prostitute in prison, something bad, something bad. And so I'm very, very thankful for my parents. Um,
So where was it you met your fourth husband then? I mean, did that happen?
at church.
Okay. So at the church that you were attending, the Assembly, Ash Grove Assembly of God, that church?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, I just knew him because he was married to his first wife, and lovely people. And he was a deacon. Paul was a deacon at the church, and his wife had cancer. She had had cancer for years, and then she passed away 3 years before we got married.
Okay.
And so he and I got married, and
Was he any different than your other three, or was he the
yes,
same?
he was very different than the other three because he was a Christian. Jesus was in this marriage. Um, During that 5 years between I got saved and I married Paul, that period of time when I was telling you I was compelled, I was just immersed in the Word, immersed in the Word. And one of the things in particular the Lord brought me through was the whole concept of marriage, and that really sunk home with me. That no wonder all those other marriages failed. No, they were doomed to fail because God wasn't in them. And so I walked into this one with a totally different mindset. This one was forever, till death do us part.
So I know you from recovery. How in the world did you get into recovery? Lead me into those events and what happened.
Okay. Um, so I get saved when I'm 35 years old. And I told you it was a very radical thing. And I just wanted to do something big for God. I was all in, sold out, all in. And I just didn't really understand yet that this sanctification thing, it's a lifelong process, you know. And so I just started, but I was okay. I just started off. I can remember going to the church on my days off and saying, "Do you need anything to be done?" So sometimes I cleaned Sunday school rooms. Sometimes I did like data entry on the computer, and just I would just show up and see what needed to be done because I didn't know what else to do. And then I started driving the church van. I drove the church van for some years on Wednesday nights. And then I started teaching Sunday school. I started teaching third and fourth graders at church. And then that led into teaching adults. And then that led to teaching at the nursing home. I did that for years. And that was a huge blessing. And at some point, our church got involved with some Convoy of Hope outreaches that I participated in. And I ended up participating in 7 of those. I love that ministry. Um, so from Convoy of Hope, they were having an outreach one time downtown targeting homeless people because they have different needs. They don't need a can of peas. They need other things. And so I was working at that outreach and struck up a conversation with a fellow who at that time was the men's chaplain at Victory Mission. He asked if I would come teach a Bible study for the women's part of that ministry. Anyway, they asked me to be ultimately asked me to be the chaplain, and I did that for 3 years. And part of their year-long program was to go to a 12-step program, and they went to Celebrate Recovery. The first time I went to Celebrate Recovery was to hear one of their testimonies. One of the ladies had just graduated, and she was going to share her testimony at Celebrate Recovery. And she asked me to come hear it, and so I wanted to support her. So of course I did. So I went, and I just remember that first time I went, I just felt strangely comfortable. I couldn't have described it really other than that. I just felt or explained it. I just felt comfortable there. And so she shared her testimony and it went well. But anyway, I kept coming back because I knew when I left that day that even though I had come to support this one lady, I was really there for me. And I didn't know why, because I got Jesus, right? I didn't really have any problems. And but I knew I was supposed to be there. So that's why I kept going back at first was sheer obedience, because I knew that's where God wanted me.
So what did you learn in that first step study? Because it sounds to me, so at first you said, I don't need it, and then you get into it. So what was it? What were some of the aha moments for you going through that first step study?
This is going to sound really strange, but it is what it is. I had never looked upon that 4 years of sexual games, some of which was more than games. I'd never looked at that as abuse. Never, not once. And one time my brother had some serious health issues and was on life support. But I was driving home from St. Louis, and I had a flashback to 1967, and it wrecked me. And to the point where I'm in the parking lot at work the next day, and I'm bawling, and I just can't pull it together, and I couldn't go into work, and I didn't know what to do. So I called my pastor, and he didn't know anything at all about my past, but he was able to get the gist of what I was saying through my tears, and he counted with me a little bit, and he prayed with me, and I was able to, go on, get out of the car, go to work. And here's what I kept thinking. This was on a Monday, and here's what I kept thinking. Thursday's coming. That's when our Celebrate Recovery is. Thursday's coming. And so I knew I was going to have a chance to share. And that was the first time I had shared about that. And as they say, the rest is history, because that was just the beginning of my inner healing. But one of the biggest things I was able to get out of it was there's a pattern. There was a pattern in my life that was established around 1967, and just some of my dysfunctional thinking that was just skewed about life and about love and about what was expected of me in a relationship. And because I'd never developed any boundaries, and that was the story of my entire life until Jesus, and then 10 years later, Celebrate Recovery.
Wow. Well, that's amazing, and it sounded like you had some incredible moments, in your first step study and going into that. So tell me, what is your biggest struggle today?
Um, my daughter's life from about the time she was 13, um, it started in a slower way, but she kind of at one point kind of went off the rails, and she ended up leaving home when she was 16, and she just ended up making poor choices, lots and lots of men in her life, and you know, tinkering with drugs and alcohol and three kids, and she was married three times, but none of those guys were the dads of her kids. Just it made my head spin. And she got this boyfriend who was newly in recovery, and but he moved in with her and her kids, and they lived very near. They lived very near to me, and things were okay at first. But then after about 6 months, it changed, and she quit coming over. And if I went over there, she'd meet me at the door and step out on the porch. And it was just different. She was shutting me out, and I could see it, but I can't fix her. And so just like watching the downward spiral in slow motion, it was very painful. And I was at work one day and got this phone call. Actually, the phone call was from my oldest grandson, who just said, "There's somebody here you need to talk to." And he handed the phone to somebody else. And it was a police officer telling me that my daughter had been killed in a car wreck. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So that day she died. I'm told, I didn't go to the accident, but I'm told that they had to extricate her body from the twisted wreckage. And meanwhile, her boyfriend, uh, who was with her, she was driving, but her boyfriend was with her, and he had some superficial injuries, so he went to the hospital. And so later, at some point, I don't remember if it was that day or the next day, we tried to get a hold of the boyfriend to see if he was okay, and never could get a hold of him by any means. And he basically just ghosted us. And I was looking back, I can understand. Who knows what was going through his mind? Because they were both under the influence of a lot of drugs, and who knows what was going through his mind. But at the time, it was like just I was angry. I was angry, not at him. I was angry at him because I never felt that he made Jessica do anything, because he didn't. She made her own choices. Um, but he did influence her, and then he just vanished, and it was all very hurtful. And I struggled with that for a long time. I really had to pray my way through it. And then a few weeks ago, we were at this big revival service in Springfield that Freeway Ministries puts on, and they allow local ministries to come have a resource table. And I always have a Celebrate Recovery table. And so I was manning the table that night, and it was before the service started, but it was just right before the service started. And I'm kind of in this zone of being friendly and chatting with people, and trying to engage them in conversation. And um, but somebody walked by, and I wasn't looking at him, but something about him caught my attention. It was the way he was looking at me, because he was staring at me as he walked by. And so I looked, and at first I said, "Hey, how are you?" It was the boyfriend. And I just froze. I just froze. And he kept staring, looking backwards as he walked. And he walked on into the crowd, and I'm still staring at where he was. It was a flashback to May 17th, 2021, when I saw his face. It just brought everything, every bit of ugliness and angst and horror from that day just washed over me. And I'm just staring out into the crowd. And at that moment, a lady from our CR, her face appeared exactly where I had been staring. Her face appeared, and she came over, and I just explained a little bit to her. Nobody knew about all that ugliness that had gone on. They just knew that my daughter had died. And, I just shared a little bit with her. And she gave me a hug. And it was such a beautiful moment, because it grounded me back into right now. It grounded me. And then we went on. It was time to go into the service. And there was like a song. I may get the details wrong, it's okay. But it was like a song where they tell you to, turn around and greet people around you. And so I did. And this boyfriend is like 4 rows behind me. And I don't think he saw me at that point, but I turned back around and so many things are swirling through my head. And none of it made sense. And, there was a testimony, I think, and then another song. And I'm thinking things like, okay, this is a recovery event, and he's here. This is an evangelical ministry event. He's here. Those are good things. I'm telling myself this. And I started to sing this song, and I couldn't sing this song, or I couldn't. And it was like, the Lord was like, I don't want that from you. And Matthew 5:23-24, every single word of it went through my head. If you're bringing your gift before the altar and there, remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to your brother. Then come and offer your gift. And I knew I have to go talk to him. And I didn't have any idea what I was going to say. And so as I'm getting out, they're singing the song, and I'm getting out of the aisle, walking back there. I'm like, okay, God, you got to tell me what to say, because I got nothing. I'm doing what you told me to do, but I've got no words. And I went and I stood behind him, and I touched him on the back, and he turned around and his eyes got wide. I still didn't have any words. So I just said, I don't know what to say. And he said, I don't know what to say either. And then he started to cry. And then I started to cry. And then he said, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And he reached over and he gave me a hug. And we're both crying. Song's still going on. And then he thanked me for coming back and talking to him. And then, I went back to my seat. And I did what God told me to do. Probably a little bit of closure took place, and grace took place, and
forgiveness.
Some level of forgiveness took place, and
yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing to see how God moves us and how He brings people into our lives and how He changes our hearts. And so it sounds like He had a change for you and for your daughter's boyfriend. Sounds like he's still on his journey. So that's good. So, tell me some favorite scripture. Is there a favorite verse or favorite scripture that, impacted you either, in your salvation or maybe in your recovery?
Ephesians 2:10 has been a huge one in my life. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And I think that was, as I look back on my life before Christ, I had zero sense of purpose in my life. Life had no meaning. Just going through every day. And it was not until, of course, Jesus, that I realized God has a plan for me, for all my junk. God has a plan for me. And God used every bit of the junk in my life to bring me to this point right now, because God has a purpose for all of us. And that is a huge thing.
Linda, thanks so much for sharing your life change story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and maybe you have had some hard things happen to your life, maybe the enemy is deceiving you into believing that chaos is normal, that God doesn't have a plan for your life. That's a lie. And God does have a plan for your life. In fact, as you surrender your life to Jesus, that plan will start to appear. If you have fallen into an unhealthy pattern, seek Jesus. He can change that negative pattern and He can change your life. However, If nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time. Hey, if you are still listening and you like this podcast, I want to encourage you to listen to previous episodes because they will help to inspire change in your life. Also, if you like what you hear, please leave a positive review because it helps to bring this podcast to others. But no matter what, may God bless you and may God bring positive change to your life.